All right, here we are, Kinesiology 230, Chapter 15, Presentation 4, talking exercise selection, exercise order, just so we have an understanding of where we are. Remember that list of chapter sections that I went over? We're here. So we've gone through 3 so far. Now we're on number 4, number 5. And this is, I'm sorry, page 400 and 402. So when we look at exercises and things that we're going to use in our workouts with our clients, it's determined by a couple different things: specificity, is there equipment available, the experience of the person, but also the experience of the personal trainer to be able to teach that piece of equipment or even utilize that piece of equipment, or are they in some cases even certified to utilize a piece of equipment. The time that the person has to dedicate to training and working out, and then the preference of the client. I mean, so that's part of it. That's kind of a key part of it, actually. All right, let's jump into this. So when we select exercises, a personal trainer should make decisions based on the needs of the client and target goals established in the initial consultation, as we talked about. If a person wants to run in their company 5K and they want a place, that's going to be different in terms of programming than a person who comes in and tells you they want to do powerlifting. Completely different. So, you have to be able to match the needs of your client and understand what they want to accomplish. So when you're considering different exercises, you'll have so many different things that go into this, but the client itself has to be able to dedicate time to working out. If they're going to be working with you 1 day a week, that schedule is going to look different. Your program is going to look different than if they work out with you 1 day a week versus 3 days a week, because you can introduce in more content over the course of a week. As a result of that content, and they noted here, where is it? And the number and complexity of exercises chosen. So when you have your hands on your clients and you work with them, you're able to introduce in more content, but you're also able to layer in more content that can be supporting a more complex content. So it provides a bit of a learning curve that you can build into the process. When they get down here, it sounds silly, but if you're in a gym or a facility that only has pneumatic type of equipment and you want to do heavy squats, that is not congruent. You're going to have to find a different gym to work out in or train in. And I will say that in general, most gyms are well equipped and well appointed, but if you have very specific things that you want to do or your client wants to do, you may have limitations that are built in. But you'll know that on the front end when you meet with your client, but you also know that on the front end, just for a simple fact that you'll be working in a facility. It's not like you just walk in to train a client and you have no idea what's in the facility. You'll know what's in that facility and know how to be able to implement in different exercises to be able to have a well thought out, well planned training program that doesn't waste time for the client. Now, the client itself will come in with their own body of work, if you will, the things that they can do and cannot do, things that they're comfortable with and not comfortable with. And you'll have to perhaps take your clients through a learning curve to teach them how to do exercise correctly. And as a trainer, sometimes you have to provide the complete demonstration. You have to show them and guide them through the process to be able to get the movement pattern just right. And many times when you're doing that, the movement pattern that's in their head that they think they're actually doing is not aligned with what you're trying to get them to do. So you have to kind of walk them through a process that's a little bit educational in nature as you teach them and show them how to do a particular exercise. And believe me, you may have some clients who be like, no way, I'm not doing that, not ever. And that happens. And you may have some clients that'll say, I'll give it a try, but you have to be able to take your clients on a path to be able to get them to be able to do a box jump or a more dynamic exercise. It doesn't happen rep one, workout one, day one that you're working with your client. So the book subcategorizes resistance training into 2 main domains, one of which is or are core exercises, and the other is our assistance exercises. And with core exercises, you have 2 or more primary joints. Usually it's a multi-joint exercise. It incorporates large muscle groups utilizing synergistic muscles to allow a large movement pattern to happen. Let me get down here. It's often structural based, where it's like a core exercise that loads the axial skeleton, the main part of my body. And the progression on this is you'll usually take a person through like freestanding squats, maybe a goblet squat to a barbell squat, where we're working on strengthening the legs. It's large multi-joint exercise. And then you go ahead and do box jumps thereafter. You want to be strong enough to be able to handle the rigors of doing a power-oriented exercise. So as a trainer, you have to understand that there's a bit of a learning curve, and you have to be very adept at being able to introduce content that's supporting of a longer term goal. If a client tells you they want to be able to do box jumps, then you're going to have to guide them down that path through a series of exercises to make that happen. Now, assistance exercises are a little bit different. They're usually single joint exercises, and they usually only focus on smaller muscle groups. And they know, like down here, like a popular exercise is the barbell bicep curl, which is spot on. Now we look at some of the other exercises down here, you get into machines like a leg extension, leg curl. Sure, it's legs, but it's a single joint exercise working one muscle group, as opposed to a squat, which is a larger multi-joint exercise that is more structural in nature, and we're loading the axial skeleton. A little bit different, even though they're both legs, right? And they still have their benefits, don't get me wrong. But the book categorizes this and kind of subcategorizes exercising the core and assistance. And I urge you to kind of get familiar with this before you take a test. So when you look at exercise selection, you have a couple things that you have to really take into account. Is the client untrained or trained? Are they unfamiliar or familiar with equipment? Are we looking at single joint or multi-joint? Are we looking at simple or complex movement patterns? And, when you work with clients, let me go back one here. When you work with your clients, you have to have that understanding of the needs and wants of the client. A trainer also has to understand their limitations. They may be very eager to do different exercise, but they just might not have the ability to do a box jump, right? Like we were talking about before, you have to take them down the path to be able to do that exercise. So when you look at this, we know that when a client begins a program, that increased level of activity is going to cause a training response. Absolutely. There's an adaptation that happens kind of globally, right? Their entire body responds. But we're trying to get specific adaptations within the training itself. And knowing that your client is coming in to work out, you can probably do kind of like generalized fitness to start, get them acclimated, get them comfortable in the gym environment, because this last bullet point to the right is pretty hugely important, but it's oftentimes just forgotten, and kind of just presume that everybody's comfortable in the gym. But it might be their first time in a gym. And when they get in there, they think, one, everybody's looking at them. And two, they think that everybody's doing stuff right. And they're the one person who's doing stuff wrong. And so they end up kind of hanging on to you like a life raft as you drag them through the gym. Part of what you have to do is really just kind of bed down their concerns that, yeah, you totally fit in here. Yes, it's totally appropriate to do that exercise. Yes, you're totally fine. We're refining the movement patterns. Don't stress about that. Nobody really cares. It's just those kind of conversations where you might have people who are like overly anxious about being in a gym environment just for the simple fact they've never been there before, and they think that they are so ostracized from everybody else. But you know what? Everybody in that gym came into that door the first time on some day. It was their day to say enough is enough. I'm going to the gym. So you have to really, in some cases, talk your clients off the ledge and get them comfortable to be able to understand that they can be comfortable in the gym and not feel they're being judged. Now, let's go ahead and get into this. So the book notes there's exercise order, and it can be influenced by the goals of the client, fatigue generating potential, and types of exercise. I can tell you when you look at this, you have descending order of priority. When you talk about descending order of priority, I may say this correctly, descending order of priority of application to the goals of the client. Goal-oriented exercises are placed earlier in the workout, and then lesser goal-oriented exercises are placed later. Type of exercise, you could have a core versus assistance, like we talked about a couple slides ago. You can do core exercise first, and then assistance exercises. And I'll tell you, I've used both. I've done any number of clamshell exercises, leg extensions, leg curls, leg press at high volume, and then I've taken my clients to doing squats. And I know I can do that with my client, and I've done it with several of them who, doing like a heavy squat was not a priority for them. And so what we did is in like that particular workout example, we pre-fatigued them on every other exercise that we could to pre-fatigue them on every other assistance exercise before we got to the core exercise. It's just a fun way to pre-exhaust somebody. So there's different ways to do this. There's many ways to skin that cat. But I will tell you, there's some creativity that you'll have as a trainer that people will naturally gravitate towards. And it's just part of the profession. All right. So the book lists, several methods to organizing a workout, and each has its own merit, and the focus is placed, on here on the right. I did this little cut and paste. They talk about going power exercises, core exercises, assistance, and then they go into multi-joint exercises, single joint exercise. I just provided an example of how I've done single joint first, and I've done assistance exercises first, and then pounded somebody on core exercises. Oh, they didn't like me too much. And then another way to think about it in terms of going large muscle exercises to smaller muscle exercises. And what's great is as a trainer, you have a little bit of creative carte blanche. When you're training athletes, it's a little different where you have this kind of framework where it's generalized warm-up, specific warm-up. Perhaps it's going to include like ABC drills, running technique drills, plyometrics, explosive-oriented drills, maybe an Olympic variation. Then you get into your focus. And once you've gone through the Olympic exercises, which are power-oriented exercises, you get into more core or focus exercises that are large muscle group multi-joint. Today's a leg day, so we're starting off with squats or front squats. And then you get into the assistance exercises for legs. It just depends how you want to program it out. All right, so let's get me out of the way here. Okay, so they list several guidelines for arranging exercises, power and core. That was on the previous slide. Push me, pull me, alternating upper body, lower body, combination method, and secondary arrangement method. So I'm going to jump in here. When you look at this, we talked about this in terms of power, multi-joint, large muscle group exercises to start. They talk about having like a push me, pull me variation where perhaps you're doing a chest press, which is very push me, and triceps push down, which is a push me exercise, with a pull exercise, a seated row, and a dumbbell bicep curl. Now, if you think of this in terms of antagonistic muscle groups, another way to look at this is you can do a chest press, which is a push me, and then you do that with a bicep curl, which is more of a pull me. You use your triceps on a chest press, but you really don't use them at all on a bench press. So to that end, you could have antagonistic muscle groups where you use large multi-joint exercises as your focus, and you use the single joint exercises as a recuperative process to the multi-joint exercise. Alternating upper body, lower body. This is one I'm sure everybody has tried or seen or heard of. If you've ever been at a gym before, this is something people work on all the time. Combining arrangement methods, it's possible to go ahead and arrange different strategies within the workouts itself. When you start talking with your clients and they ask you, like, what are we going to do today? And you say, well, we're going to do an alternating push-pull today. Or we're going to do alternating upper body. Then you can kind of articulate what your vision is when you're working with your clients. Now, secondary arrangements, they talk about compound sets. And when you look at compound sets and supersets, it's a little different animal in terms of fitness orientation and working with people. In general, you wouldn't do these with your initial clients on day one, but you could definitely do them with your clients later on. So up to 2 exercises together, train the same muscle group, incline bench press and incline dumbbell fly. That would be a compound set. Think like compound interest in your investment account. You're compounding one on top of the other. If we superset, that's 2 exercises that activate opposite or opposing antagonistic muscle groups, very much like I talked about before. In here, they're talking about biceps curl and triceps press. Those are absolutely antagonistic muscle groups. I provided the example of doing antagonistic muscle groups with a compound movement pattern, chest press, and then a single joint movement pattern, bicep curl. Same kind of family tree there, but just a little different strategy. All right, I'm breaking off of this. I'm going over to the next presentation.